story in the immediate aftermath of the resurrection, though they didn't know that. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking very sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified. But we'd hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of the angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." And then Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" And then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all of Scripture. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening, and the day is nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the Scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." And then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So ends the reading of God's holy word.
Thanks be to God.
Invite us to pray. Holy and gracious God, one of the words of reassurance and joy in this story is that no matter what road we are on, you're with us. And some of our roads are harder than others. And so we lean heavily upon these sacred texts, upon this story, and the truth within it that you never forsake us, that you continually walk by our side. May that become more real to each of us in the reflecting upon this passage and in the living of these coming days. We ask this in your holy name. Amen. I won't touch it. Deep within the human psyche is the desire to travel. And over the years, the hot travel destinations have changed, of course. One year it's Kenya, and maybe it's Vietnam, maybe Tierra del Fuego, maybe even Cleveland. But I recently learned of a very different travel option, one that doesn't require long plane flights, which is nice for me. Doesn't require busy airports or that enormous salesman that sits next to you for 6 hours. This travel option is called glamping. Yeah, I came across the word in a clothing catalog. And if somebody honestly had put me to the task of defining it on the spot, I figured it would mean something like a painful muscle spasm. As in, I wanted to take a walk, but I was glamping up. Decided not to. How wrong I was. Those of you that know, glamping essentially means high-end camping. Glitzy, glamorous camping. It's the rage these days for some. Camping with electricity, flush toilets, hot showers, double beds, TVs, sofas. I could probably glamp if I just tore the roof off my house. That'd be close. In the old days of mere camping, folks would put all their gear on their backs and hoof it into the wilds. I don't know if glampers can do that these days with all the stuff they need. I suspect many do not. Rather, a savvy glamper needs to find one of those luxurious glamping sites and pay good money to be there and kick back and enjoy a week of roughing it. The things that we'll do for a change of scene. I guess it's a change. Well, as I mentioned, the human impulse to move about can be strong, and it can be especially strong if we're not feeling real good about where we are at the moment, especially if we're in the throes of a loss. One of the first bits of pastoral wisdom that anybody imparted to me, and you've all heard this, I'm sure, is that after the death of a loved one, don't make any big decisions for a year. Loss can, and does, throw us into a state of bewilderment and confusion. And sometimes it can be all we can handle just to make a choice about breakfast, let alone anything bigger. Most of us can probably recall an experience of loss, the loss of someone dear to us, when that dense fog sets in. And it can last for days or weeks or months. The disciples in our story, it's a long build-up, but the disciples in our story today were in that kind of dense psychic fog, heading out of town, away from Jerusalem, away from the place of desolation and loss, where Jesus was dead, as were their hopes. Scholars don't even know where Emmaus is exactly. Maybe the disciples didn't know either, exactly. They may well have thought, we don't really care where we're going, we're just out of here. Anywhere but here. When the two men encountered this woefully ignorant stranger who hadn't heard the sad news, Cleopas pipes up indignantly almost, can you be the only one that doesn't know? And he unpacks the tragic tale. For Cleopas and his friend, this was truly a sad story on the home front. So much promise, so much pain. And it's hard to know why. Presumably after weeks or even months of traveling in the company of Jesus, they didn't recognize him. But something prevented it. Whether it was a divine disguise of some kind or simply the depth of grief. In any case, they failed to see who he was. But then again, that's not so unusual for you and me. Well, at least it's not unusual for me. Think if you've had an experience of failing to recognize somebody. Maybe because you weren't expecting them. Maybe because they didn't look the way you expected them to look. I bumped into someone in Wegmans last week, and I immediately gave the woman a big hug, smiled, blurted out how good it was to see her, and asked, were they up from Florida for a visit? She looked totally perplexed. I thought she was Diane Case. For all the world. She wasn't. She hadn't flown up from Florida. She'd driven in from Middle Cheshire Road. And didn't I want to crawl into the nearest loaf of rye bread that was right next to me? Stay there for about a day.
You'll have you arrested.
Mary Ann's looking at me like,
I was his witness. I was trying to help him.
another example, and I know you've heard this one because this is national in nature, it's pop culture, but years ago, Ricky Nelson was at a concert at Madison Square Gardens. He didn't play all the old hits the way they expected. He took a burn after this event and went ahead and wrote that now famous song, Garden Party, in which he sang, If memories are all I sing, I'd rather drive a truck. He didn't look or sound the way he was supposed to look and sound. Now, in defense of our two friends, Cleopas and the unnamed companion, Jesus was pulling some fast ones here. For one thing, he simply refused to stay dead. And that was so Jesus. Couldn't pin the guy down. They thought he was going to bring military victory to Israel, but that wasn't the plan. They thought he'd fraternize with the rich and powerful and the temple elite, but he hung out with riffraff. They thought he was going to be dead and gone. Next thing you know, he sidles up to them on this dusty road to nowhere. One of my favorite road signs is in a small town between D.C. and Ocean City, Maryland, where you have to drive through a notorious speed trap. And the sign reads, "If you lived here, you'd be home right now." I think they need a second sign that would read, "If you lived here, you'd know not to speed and you wouldn't be out $50. But I like the sign because in a funny way it reminds me that everywhere is someone's home. It kind of presents a challenge to me to find home wherever I am. And for that matter, to find God wherever I am. Eventually, the disciples on this road to a no-account village in the sticks did recognize Jesus in their midst. But it didn't happen until he was invited in. Invited in to join them and to break bread. It happened in the act of hospitality. I like bread. It helps a lot of things. And it was kind of nice to find this quote that essentially says that. A quote from Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote. He says, "All sorrows are less with bread." Couldn't agree more. A couple of months ago, we had a church cabinet meeting over dinner. And the jury's still out in my mind as to whether we actually have any faster meeting with dinner. But it was a lot tastier. And there is something deep and, I think, spiritual about eating with others. Taking in nourishment of the body and of the soul is one thing. We're also revealing our common need to be fed and for God. These are words that must sound familiar because they come out of one of our communion liturgies. And like the disciples in this story, when we open our mouths and our spirits and receive this kind of nourishment, it can help us to see Jesus in our midst. Even if he may not look exactly the way we expect. Well, I ran into another old friend the other day in Wegmans. This one I did recognize, happily. And we chatted along, catching each other up on the latest. She's had some health challenges, but she's also resolutely upbeat. And at one point, after sharing all the ups and downs and then some of the good stuff that had been going on in her life, she exclaimed, "Isn't Jesus great?" Now, I don't often hear that kind of language, to be honest with you. Even I don't. But I've known this woman for years. She's a dear friend. I think she would consider herself probably within that category of fundamentalist Christian. It's a little different bent from my own. And the differences can be real. And yet, in that moment, she had shared so honestly and so deeply, as is really her style, that my response could only be, "Yes, he is." And I meant it. Oddly enough, I was finishing up my lunch eating while we had this conversation. If the bridge between two souls is strong enough, I don't think it matters how much water is rushing beneath it. What matters is the bridge and the communion. As Cleopas and the other disciple broke bread with Jesus, their eyes were open and they exclaimed, "Doggone it, didn't we know it? Couldn't we hear our hearts pounding as we hoofed up the road with him?" Or words to that effect. I think every one of us knows real communion when we experience it. We may resist it at times, but I also think we want it badly. It was announced in church in the bulletin that the ladies' Bible study will be held Thursday morning at 10 a.m. All ladies are invited to lunch in the fellowship hall after the BS is done. Truly. See, even a good BS session is best followed up with breaking bread. In the course of our travels, Jesus will draw close. He may look the way we expect, then again he may not. But either way, he bears a blessing for us as we open ourselves to him.